The snow was falling so thick on Highway 10 that it felt like riding through television static. Each flake caught in the headlight beam created a hypnotic, disorienting tunnel of white that could swallow a man whole. The wind howled through Snoqualmie Pass with a violence that could snap tree branches like matchsticks, but Marcus Stone barely felt it. At 45, with a sprawling iron-gray beard and a leather cut bearing the winged death's head of the Hells Angels, Stone was a man forged in harsh climates and harsher realities. It was December 24th, 11:30 at night. Most of Washington state was tucked into warm beds, children dreaming of presents, families gathered around fireplaces. Stone was just trying to get his custom Harley Panhead back to the Spokane clubhouse after a mandatory run to Seattle. The roads were a treacherous sheet of black ice covered by a fresh, blinding layer of powder. His massive hands, scarred and calloused from decades of hard living, gripped the handlebars with the kind of practiced control that comes from riding through hell itself. The bike's headlight cut a narrow, desperate cone of yellow through the blizzard. That was when he saw it. Just a flash of color off the shoulder of the highway, a jarring speck of pale pink against the endless, aggressive white of the snowbank. 99 out of 100 people would have kept driving, assuming it was a piece of blown debris, a discarded jacket, nothing worth risking your life on ice-slicked asphalt in a blizzard. But Stone's eyes were trained to notice the things that didn't belong. In his world, the thing out of place was usually the thing that got you killed, or the thing that needed saving. He downshifted the heavy engine, roaring in protest as the tires broke traction for one terrifying heartbeat, before finally biting into the icy asphalt. The Harley fishtailed the rear wheel, sliding sideways, but Stone corrected with the muscle memory of a man who had been riding since he was 16. He pulled over onto the shoulder snow already accumulating on his shoulders and in his beard, and kicked the stand down. His heavy engineer boots crunched into knee-deep snow as he trudged toward the ditch. The pink shape began to resolve itself as he got closer. It was a thin cotton pajama top, children's size. Stone's breath hitched in his throat, visible in the frigid air like a ghost escaping his lungs. Lying in the snow, curled into a tight, shivering ball, was a little girl. She couldn't have been older than 6 or 7. Her bare feet were a terrifying shade of purple from the cold, and her matted blonde hair was crusted with ice and what looked like frozen blood. One small hand was clutched against her chest, the other stretched out as if reaching for something that wasn't there. Stone dropped to his knees in the snow, the sheer size of him 6'4", and built like a brick wall, dwarfing the tiny, fragile frame before him. For a moment he couldn't move, couldn't breathe, because in the pale glow of the distant street lamp, with the snow falling around her like some twisted Christmas card, the little girl looked exactly like Lily, his daughter, dead for 10 years. The resemblance was so striking it felt like God himself had reached down and punched Stone in the chest. Same blonde hair, same small frame, same age she had been when the drunk driver had run the red light and turned Stone's entire world into a graveyard. He blinked hard, forcing the memory back into the locked box where he kept it, and reached out. His hands, which had broken jaws and crushed windpipes, which had held guns and knives, and every instrument of violence a man could imagine, moved with surprising gentleness as he touched the girl's cheek. It was like touching a block of ice. Stone pulled off his heavy leather gauntlets and checked for a pulse. There, faint, thready, like a bird's heartbeat. He rolled her slightly onto her back to check her breathing, and the full horror of her situation revealed itself beneath the glow of that distant lamp. Her face was severely swollen. A dark, angry ring of purple and black surrounded her left eye, and her lower lip was split, crusted with dried blood. Defensive bruises in the shape of adult fingertips were stamped violently into the flesh of her thin arms. These weren't fresh. Some were yellowing, some were deep purple, some were that sickly green-brown color. That meant they were days old, healing in stages. She hadn't wandered out here. She had been beaten, systematically, over time. And then someone had driven her out to the middle of nowhere, in the middle of a blizzard and tossed her into a ditch to die. She let out a faint rattling exhale. Alive. Barely. There was no time to call 911. Out here, an ambulance would take 45 minutes to arrive through the snow and ice, and this child didn't have 45 minutes. She didn't have 15. Furthermore, Stone had an active warrant out of Oregon for an old aggravated assault charge. If the state troopers showed up, he'd be in cuffs before he could explain himself, and the girl would be frozen solid before anyone thought to check on her. Without a second thought, Stone stripped off his heavy reinforced leather jacket, his club cut still attached, and wrapped the massive garment around the tiny girl. The sheepskin lining enveloped her entirely, swallowing her like a sleeping bag. He scooped her up with both arms. She weighed nothing. It was like holding a bundle of dry twigs wrapped in cotton. "Hold on, little bird," Stone whispered his voice, a gravelly rumble that the wind immediately carried away. "I got you. You're not dying out here, not tonight." He carried her to the Harley, his mind already racing through logistics. The bike wasn't built for passengers, especially not unconscious ones. He sat down on the seat, positioned the girl between his chest and the gaunt tank, and zipped his thick flannel shirt over her as best he could to trap his body heat around her. She was so small, she fit entirely inside the shelter of his torso. He fired up the panhead. The engine screamed into the silent, snowy night, a sound of defiance against the cold and the dark and the cruelty that had left a child to freeze. Stone ignored the speed limits, ignored the ice, pushed the bike to the absolute edge of disaster, leaning into curves that would have killed a lesser rider, his entire focus on keeping the fragile life pressed against his chest from slipping away. He wasn't riding toward the hospital. The hospital meant questions, police reports, child services. And Stone had learned long ago that the system didn't always save the people who needed saving. Sometimes the system was the enemy. He was riding toward the only sanctuary he knew that wouldn't ask questions. The neon sign of Rusty's Auto Salvage flickered weakly through the storm on the outskirts of Spokane. Behind the scrapyard, past the towers of rusted car bodies and stripped engines, sat a heavily fortified cinder block garage. It was a known safe house for the local Hells Angels chapter. More importantly, it was where Dr. Thorne spent his nights. Silas Thorne had lost his medical license a decade ago for writing off-the-books prescriptions to people who couldn't afford real health care. He was the best trauma surgeon on the wrong side of the law, a thin, nervous man in his early 60s, with hands that still remembered how to save lives, even if the state said he wasn't allowed to anymore. Stone kicked the steel door hard enough to leave a boot-shaped dent in the metal. "Doc, open the damn door." Locks unfastened with a heavy clatter. The door swung open to reveal Doc Thorne in a bathrobe holding a sawed-off shotgun that immediately lowered when he saw the towering biker completely covered in snow holding a leather-wrapped bundle. "Stone, what in God's name are you doing riding in this weather?" "Clear the bench, Doc," Stone ordered, and is pushing past the older man into the blessed heat of the garage. "Now move." Doc scrambled, sweeping carburetors and wrenches off a long metal workbench with one arm. Stone gently, carefully laid the bundle down and pulled back the heavy leather jacket. Doc Thorne gasped, actually took a step back, one hand coming up to cover his mouth. "Good Lord, is that a child?" "Stone, what have you done?" The question hit like a slap. Stone's eyes, normally the color of weathered stone, blazed with a dangerous protective fury that made even Doc Thorne, who had known him for 15 years, take another step back. "I didn't do this, you idiot," Stone snarled, his voice low and deadly. "I found her off Highway 10-mile marker 42 dumped in a snowbank like garbage. She's freezing to death, and she's been beaten half to hell. Fix her." The command in his voice was absolute. Doc Thorne's professional instincts finally overrode his shock. He grabbed a heavy wool blanket from a cabinet, a space heater, and the battered medical kit he kept for club emergencies. His hands, which had been shaking with surprise, steadied the moment he started working. For the next hour, the sprawling, grease-stained garage functioned as an emergency room. Doc carefully elevated her body temperature, started an IV line of warm saline solution, and meticulously cleaned her wounds with the practiced efficiency of a man who had done battlefield triage. He worked in focused silence, occasionally muttering medical terminology under his breath. Stone stood in the corner, chain-smoking Marlboros, pacing like a caged tiger. Every few minutes he would stop, stare at the small form on the table, and the muscle in his jaw would work like he was chewing on broken glass. He looked at the blood on his hands. Her blood transferred from when he had carried her. It was under his fingernails, on his shirt. He had washed it off twice and it still felt like it was there. The Hells Angels were outlaws. They smuggled, they fought, they operated entirely outside the bounds of polite society. But there was an ironclad, unwritten rule in the biker code that every patch member understood in his bones. You do not touch women, and you never ever harm a child. To do so was a death sentence, not from the law, from the brothers. She's stabilizing, Doc finally said, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cold outside. He peeled off his latex gloves and dropped them in a trash bin. Body temperature is coming up. Pulse is stronger, but stone these bruises. This wasn't a one-time thing. These are in different stages of healing. Someone has been hurting this little girl for a long time. Stone's fist slammed into the cinder block wall hard enough to split his knuckles. He didn't even flinch. Doc turned the girl's head gently to clean a gash near her ear, and something caught the overhead fluorescent light. Something gold. Wait, look at this. Stone stepped forward. Tangled in the girl's matted, blood-crusted hair, hidden beneath the collar of her thin pajama top, was a heavy, incredibly ornate gold locket on a thick chain. It was the kind of jewelry that didn't belong on a child wearing threadbare discount store pajamas. The locket itself was old antique, even with delicate engraving work that spoke of craftsmanship from another era. Doc carefully worked it free from her hair and popped the latch with his thumbnail. Inside was a tiny, faded photograph of a woman with striking green eyes holding a baby. The woman was beautiful in that timeless way, elegant and refined. On the opposite side of the locket, etched into the gold and flowing script, were the letters E.W. and beneath them the words, "My angel." "This is solid gold," Doc whispered, holding it up to the light. 24-karat custom made. I used to see pieces like this when I worked out of the private clinics in Seattle before I lost my license. Stone, this kid doesn't come from a trailer park. She comes from serious money. Before Stone could respond, a small, terrified whimper broke the silence. Both men froze. The girl's eyes fluttered open. They were a piercing, vivid green. Exactly like the woman in the locket. Exactly like Lily's had been. She saw the unfamiliar, grimy garage ceiling above her. Her eyes darted around wildly, trying to make sense of where she was, how she had gotten here. Then her gaze locked onto Stone. He was a terrifying sight. A giant of a man 6'4" and probably 260, covered in tattoos that crawled up his neck and down his arms. A thick gray streaked beard that made him look like some kind of Norse god of war. Eyes that had seen things that would break normal men. The Hells Angels' death's head patch on his chest, the universal symbol of outlaw culture. The girl shrank back on the table, letting out a sharp gasp of fear, trying to curl into a ball, despite the IV line in her arm and the blanket tangled around her legs. Her small hands came up defensively, covering her face. Stone immediately dropped to one knee beside the table, making himself as small and non-threatening as a man his size possibly could. He took off his skull cap, revealing close-cropped gray hair, and tossed his half-finished cigarette into a nearby oil drum. He held both hands up, palms out, the universal gesture of peace. Hey, it's okay," Stone said, his voice dropping to the softest rumble he could manage. It was the voice he had used with Lily when she'd had nightmares before the world had taken her from him. "Nobody is going to hurt you here. I promise you that. You're safe." The girl trembled, pulling the wool blanket up to her chin with shaking hands. Her one good eye, the one that wasn't swollen, nearly shut, darted between Stone and Doc Thorne, trying to assess the threat level. Children have an innate radar for danger, but they also have a radar for true protectors. Whatever she saw in the outlaw biker's eyes, something in his tone or his posture made her stop crying. "What's your name, little bird?" Stone asked gently. The girl's lower lip quivered. She gripped the locket around her neck tightly with one small fist, like it was the only real thing in the world. "Cora," she whispered, her voice raspy and broken like she had been screaming. "Okay, Cora, that's a real pretty name. I'm Stone. This here is Doc Thorne. He's the one who fixed you up, made sure you didn't freeze. You understand?" Cora nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving Stone's face. "Cora, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be real brave. Can you do that for me?" Another small nod. "Who did this to you? Who left you in the snow?" Cora's lower lip quivered harder. A single tear rolled down her bruised cheek. She looked at the locket in her hand, then back at Stone, and something in her small face crumbled. "The warden," she whispered. Stone and Doc exchanged a glance. The warden, not Daddy, not a name, a title. "The warden," Stone repeated carefully. "Is that what you call him?" "That's what everyone calls him. He said I was bad. He said I cost too much money. He said Christmas is only for real daughters, not stolen ones." The words hit Stone like a freight train. Stolen. This child had been stolen. Stolen. Stone kept his voice level, controlled, even though rage was building in his chest like a wildfire. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "Mr. Victor said my real mommy went crazy. He said she's locked in the sad house where they keep the broken people. He said I have to be good or I'll go there too. But I wasn't good. I cried too much. So he put me in the car and we drove, and then he told me to get out. And when I didn't want to, he..." Her voice broke. She touched her swollen eye with one finger. "He made me get out. And then he left." Doc Thorne had gone pale. He grabbed the edge of the workbench to steady himself. Stone stood up slowly, his massive frame unfolding to its full, intimidating height. The protective instinct that had fueled his desperate ride through the blizzard had just transformed into something entirely different. Something cold. Something calculating. Something absolutely lethal. Dr. Stone said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion in the way that meant he was at his most dangerous. "Keep the door locked. Don't let anyone in except club members. Understand?" "Where are you going?" "I needed to make a phone call. We're going to need more guys." Stone walked to the far corner of the garage where an old rotary phone hung on the wall. He dialed a number he knew by heart. It rang twice before a gravel, rough voice answered. "Yeah." "Ace, it's Stone. I need you to get everyone to Rusty's. Now, full patch. This is an emergency." "It's Christmas Eve, brother. This better be good." "It's not good. It's bad. Real bad. But we're going to make it right." There was a pause. Ace had known Stone for 20 years. They had served time together, bled together, buried brothers together. He knew the tone in Stone's voice, knew what it meant. "How many bodies do you need?" "All of them. We'll be there in 30. Stone hung up the phone and walked back to where Cora sat on the table looking small and scared and impossibly fragile. He knelt down again, bringing himself to her eye level. "Cora, I need to ask you about the locket, the picture inside. Who is that?" Cora's small fingers opened the locket carefully, reverently, like it was made of glass instead of gold. She looked at the photograph with an expression of such profound sadness that it made Stone's chest ache. "That's my real mommy. Before the warden locked her away. Her name is Eva. She used to sing to me. She used to read me stories. And then one day she started acting funny, and the warden said she was sick in the head, and they took her to the sad house, and I never saw her again." "Eva," Stone repeated, filing the name away. "And the warden, his real name. Do you know it?" "Mr. Victor. Victor Ashford. He has a big house with gates and cameras. He told people he's my daddy, but he's not. My real daddy died before I can remember." Stone pulled out his phone and took a photo of the locket both sides. The photograph, the engraving, E.W. Eva. The pieces were starting to come together. By 3 in the morning on Christmas Day, Rusty's Auto Salvage was no longer quiet. The roar of a dozen heavy V-twin engines shook snow off the corrugated metal roof as patched members of the Spokane Hells Angels chapter arrived. They filed into the garage one by one, stamping snow off their boots, a terrifying assembly of leather denim and hard-earned muscle. Men with names like Tank and Reaper and Diesel, men who had done time, men who had killed men, who lived by a code that most of society would never understand. At the center of the room stood Ace, the chapter president. He was 50 years old, a Desert Storm veteran, with a long, jagged scar running down the left side of his face, courtesy of shrapnel from an IED outside Basra. He was ruthless when he needed to be, highly intelligent always, and commanded absolute loyalty from every man in the room. He wore his colors with the kind of pride that came from earning them the hard way. Stone stood by the workbench where Cornell slept fitfully under the effects of Doc Thorne's carefully measured painkillers. He briefed Ace in low tones while the other brothers gathered around, listening with the kind of focused intensity that combat veterans recognize in each other. "She called him the warden," Stone explained, handing Ace the gold locket, "and she said she was stolen. Look at the injuries, Ace. This wasn't discipline. This wasn't a parent losing his temper. The bastard tried to kill her, drove her out into a blizzard, and left her to freeze to death." Ace turned the heavy gold locket over in his scarred hands. His cold blue eyes narrowed as he studied the engraving, the photograph, the quality of the craftsmanship. Then he looked at the small form sleeping on the makeshift bed, her face still swollen and bruised. "Nobody dumps a kid on our stretch of highway and lives to see New Year's," Ace said quietly. "Not while I run this chapter." He turned to face the assembled brothers, holding up the locket so everyone could see it. "Listen up. We have a guest in the back room, 6 years old. Somebody beat her and left her to freeze on Highway 10 near mile marker 42. They think they got away with it because it's Christmas Eve and the cops are busy pulling drunks out of ditches." A low, dangerous murmur rippled through the men. Heavy chains rattled. Knuckles cracked. These were not men who tolerated the abuse of children. These were not men who forgave easily. "The cops operate by the book," Ace continued, his voice carrying the authority of a battlefield commander. "They need warrants. They need jurisdiction. They need permission from judges and supervisors and all kinds of people who might be on the wrong payroll. We don't. Stone, what did you see at the scene?" "Snow was heavy, filling in fast," Stone replied, his voice steady despite the rage simmering beneath the surface. "But before I pulled her out, I saw tire tracks on the shoulder. Wide tread, deep grooves. Not a sedan. It was a heavy luxury SUV, Range Rover maybe, or a Mercedes G-Wagon." He reached into the pocket of his leather jacket and pulled out a crumpled, damp piece of paper, smoothing it out on the workbench. "I found this frozen in the slush right where the passenger door would have opened. Looks like it fell out of someone's pocket when they dragged her out." Ace took the receipt, carefully handling it like the piece of evidence it was. The ink was heavily smeared by snow and moisture, but a few lines were still legible at the very top. "Whitmore Fine Wines and Spirits. Date December 24th, 2024. Time 21:15. Customer V. Ashford." "Whitmore," muttered Tank, a giant of a man with full-sleeve tattoos and a neck like a tree trunk. "That's down in South Hill, the rich part of town. Gated communities, the kind of guys who pay off the judges we stand in front of." Ashford Ace said the name, tasting like poison in his mouth. He looked at Stone. "You know a Victor Ashford?" Stone's jaw clenched so hard the muscle jumped. "Yeah, I know exactly who that is. Victor Ashford is the CEO of Ashford Logistics, real estate, shipping, construction contracts, local politics. He's the guy pushing to have the city demolish Southside low-income housing to build luxury condos. He plays golf with the chief of police, serves on charity boards, big donations to the mayor's re-election campaign." "I know that guy," Tank chimed in, his voice a low rumble. "Worked security at one of his construction sites last year before he fired half the crew to save a buck. He drives a black Mercedes G-Wagon, 2023 model, custom plates. The pieces were falling into place with terrifying speed. A wealthy, untouchable pillar of the community. A stolen child. A brutal attempt to dispose of evidence on a night when a blizzard would bury the body until spring. A man who thought his money and his connections made him invisible, made him above consequences. He thinks his money protects him. Stone said, his voice dropping to that deadly quiet tone. Let's go show him he's wrong. Hold on, Stone, Ace said, putting a hand on the bigger man's chest. Not restraining, just grounding. We don't just kick down the door of a billionaire on Christmas morning. The cops will bring down the National Guard on us. If we do this, we do it the Angel's way. We ghost him. We take him apart piece by piece, and we find out where that little girl really came from. Ace turned to address the room, falling naturally into the role of general planning a military operation. Tank, you take 3 guys. Ride to Ashford's estate in South Hill. I don't care about the gates or the cameras. Get eyes on the property. Check the garage for that G-Wagon and see if the tires match the tracks Stone described. Do not engage. Just watch. If he tries to leave, follow him, but stay back. We need to know his movements. Roger that, Tank said, already mentally selecting his team. Reaper Ace continued, turning to a lean, hard-faced man with prison ink covering his knuckles. You still have contacts at the DMV county records. Yeah, Jimmy Malone. Owes me for getting his nephew out of a situation last year. Call him. I don't care if it's Christmas. The initials on the locket, EW Eva, the girl said. I need to know who she is. Property records, marriage licenses, anything tied to the name Ashford. We need the full picture. I'm on it. And Stone Ace said, turning to face his brother, you and I are going to have a conversation. Private. The 2 men walked to the far corner of the garage, away from the others. Ace lit a cigarette, took a long drag, and studied Stone's face in the dim light. He saw things there he hadn't seen in years. Anger, yes, but also something else. Something that looked dangerously close to obsession. She looks like Lily, Ace said quietly. It wasn't a question. Stone's throat worked. He looked away toward where Cora slept under the heavy blanket, her small chest rising and falling with each breath. Yeah, he finally admitted. Same age, same hair, same eyes. When I first saw her in that ditch, for a second, I thought God was giving me a second chance. Crazy, right? Not crazy. Human. Ace took another drag. But that's exactly why I need to know your head's in the right place. This can't be about Lily. This has to be about that little girl in there. About doing the right thing for her. Not about trying to fix something that can't be fixed. I know that. Do you? Because the Stone, I know the brother I've ridden with for 20 years, he's controlled, disciplined, thinks 3 moves ahead. But the Stone standing in front of me right now looks like he's ready to burn the whole city down. And I need to know which one showed up tonight. Stone met Ace's eyes directly. I couldn't save Lily. The drunk driver who killed her judge gave him 3 years. He served 18 months. Got out on good behavior. Last I heard, he's working at a car dealership in Portland. Married. 2 kids. Living his life like he didn't destroy mine. His voice was steady, but his hands were shaking. He clenched them into fists. I've spent 10 years trying to live with that. Trying to accept that the system failed her. Failed me, Svi. I put that rage in a box and I locked it, and I threw away the key because the alternative was eating a bullet. But tonight, when I saw Cora in that snow, when I saw what someone did to her and just threw her away like trash, that box opened, and I can't close it again. Not until this is done. Not until whoever did this pays. Ace was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. Okay, I believe you, but we do this smart. We get the evidence. We find out who this Eva is, what happened to her, why Ashford has her daughter. And then we make him pay in a way that sticks. Not just a beating in an alley. We take everything from him. His money, his reputation, his freedom. We make sure he can never hurt another soul. Agreed, agreed. And Stone, If at any point I think you're going to do something stupid, something that puts this club or that little girl at risk, I will pull you off this operation. Brother or not, clear, clear. They shook hands, the old warrior's grip, and walked back to where the others were already mobilizing. Tank was gearing up with three of the club's best riders. Reaper was on his phone speaking in low tones to his contact. The garage had transformed into a command center, men checking weapons, reviewing maps, preparing for what might come. Stone walked over to the small office where Cora slept. He stood in the doorway watching her breathe. Doc Thorne had cleaned her up, bandaged her wounds, dressed her in an oversized Hells Angels t-shirt that hung on her like a dress. She looked impossibly small, impossibly vulnerable, but she was alive. And as long as Stone had breath in his body, she would stay that way. A sharp gasp broke his reverie. Cora's eyes had opened. She sat up quickly, looking around in confusion and fear, until her gaze landed on Stone. Recognition flickered across her small face. "Mr. Stone." He stepped into the room, moving slowly, non-threateningly. "Yeah, little bird? It's me. How you feeling?" "My head hurts, and my arm." She looked at the IV line taped to her small arm with curiosity rather than fear. "That's the medicine. It's helping you heal. You're safe here, Cora. Nobody's going to hurt you. You have my word on that." Cora looked past him to where she could see the assembled bikers in the garage, these massive, intimidating men covered in leather and tattoos. Any normal child would have been terrified, but Cora had been raised by monsters in expensive suits. She knew that danger didn't always look dangerous. "Are you going to get the warden?" she asked, her voice small but steady. Stone knelt down beside the cot, bringing himself to her level. He looked her directly in the eyes and he told her the truth because children deserve truth. "Yeah, Cora, we're going to get him. And he is never, ever going to hurt you again. That's a promise." The little girl nodded slowly. Then she did something that made Stone's breath catch in his throat. She reached out with her small hand and touched the winged death's head patch on his leather cut. "You're like the angels in my mommy's stories," she said. "The scary ones, the ones who fight the demons." "Something like that," Stone said quietly. "Good, because he's a demon, and demons need to be stopped." From the doorway, Ace's voice called out, "Stone, Reaper got a hit. You need to hear this." Stone stood, but Cora grabbed his hand with surprising strength. "You'll come back." "I'm not going anywhere, little bird. I'll be right outside that door. You need anything, you call out. Understand?" She nodded and released his hand. Stone walked back into the garage where Reaper was standing with his phone pressed to his ear, writing furiously on a notepad. He hung up and turned to face the assembled brothers, his expression grim. Jimmy came through, the initials EW. They stand for Evangeline Whitmore. The Whitmores were old money, shipping timber real estate going back to the 1800s. Evangeline was the sole heir to a family trust fund worth just north of $200 million. A low whistle went through the room. $200 million. That was serious money, the kind of money people killed for. 5 years ago, Reaper continued, Victor Ashford swooped in and married her. Society wedding all over the papers. Big charity couple. Then 2 years ago, Ashford had a private judge declare Evangeline completely mentally incompetent, claimed she was a danger to herself and her child. He was granted full power of attorney and control over the Whitmore Trust. Then he locked her away in Riverside Psychiatric Institute, a private facility up in the mountains near Coeur d'Alene. The room went deathly quiet as the sheer scale of the evil began to sink in. "The trust has a stipulation," Ace said slowly, his mind working through the angles. "If Evangeline dies, the money goes to her direct bloodline, goes to the kid." "Exactly," Reaper confirmed. "But as long as Cora is alive, Ashford can't fully liquidate the assets. He just manages them. But if Evangeline is locked away forever, drugged out of her mind, and Cora tragically wanders off into a blizzard and freezes to death," he let the sentence hang. "Ashford inherits it all." Stone finished, his voice like gravel. $200 million. He beat a 6-year-old girl and threw her into a ditch for money. The collective rage of the Hells Angels chapter was a physical force in the room. Men gripped heavy steel chains. Others checked the actions of their firearms. This was no longer just a rescue mission. This was war against a man who used his wealth and influence to destroy a family, to brutalize a child, to think himself above the law. Ace stepped into the center of the room, the undisputed leader taking command. Here's the play. Ashford owns a local police chief. If we call the cops, he stalls them, destroys evidence, and we get arrested for trespassing and kidnapping. If we kill him, it's a murder charge, and the state puts Cora in the foster system where she's vulnerable. We don't just take his life, we take his power. We take his freedom, we take everything. He began assigning targets like a general deploying troops. Tank, you and your crew hold position at the estate. Eyes only. Nobody leaves. If Ashford tries to run, you follow but do not engage. Clear, crystal. Reaper, take 5 men and ride to Riverside Psychiatric. It's a rich man's prison, which means the guards are rent-a-cops working for minimum wage. I want Evangeline Whitmore out of there and brought here, alive and safe. Use whatever force necessary, but do not kill anyone unless you have no choice. Understood. Stone stepped forward. What about me? Ace looked at him for a long moment. You stay here. Protect Cora, because if Ashford figures out she's alive, he'll send someone to finish what he started. And I need someone I trust absolutely to make sure that doesn't happen. Stone wanted to argue, wanted to be part of the assault teams, but Ace was right. Cora needed protection, and there was no one Stone trusted more than himself to provide it. Understood. Good. Everyone else mount up. We ride in 5. The garage erupted into controlled chaos as men prepared to deploy. Stone watched them go, the roar of engines fading into the pre-dawn silence. Then he walked back to where Cora slept, pulled up a chair beside her cot, and settled in for a long vigil. He pulled the photo of Lily from his wallet, looked at it in the dim light. His daughter would have been 16 now, would have been learning to drive, going to prom, living the life that had been stolen from her. I couldn't save you, baby girl, Stone whispered to the photograph. But I can save her, and I will, I swear it. He tucked the photo back in his wallet, checked the magazine in his Colt 1911, and waited. The engines of 6 Harley-Davidsons roared through the pre-dawn darkness as Reaper led his team up the winding mountain road toward Riverside Psychiatric Institute. The blizzard had finally broken, leaving behind a deadly silence and a landscape transformed into something alien and hostile. Ice clung to everything, making the curves treacherous even for experienced riders. Reaper was 42 years old, lean and hard as a knife blade, with prison tattoos covering his knuckles, and the cold, analytical mind of a man who had done intelligence work before the government decided he asked too many inconvenient questions. He rode point his team, following in tight formation, behind him Diesel, a 300-pound enforcer who could tear a car door off its hinges, Bones, a former Marine sniper with a 1,000-yard stare, and 3 more patch members whose loyalty had been earned in blood. The Riverside Psychiatric Institute loomed against the dark pines like something out of a Gothic nightmare. It was less hospital and more fortress, all stone walls and barred windows designed to keep people in rather than help them heal. The kind of place where wealthy families sent inconvenient relatives to disappear behind a veneer of medical respectability. Reaper killed his engine a quarter-mile out. The others followed suit. In the sudden silence broken only by the ticking of cooling metal and the whisper of wind through frozen trees, he laid out the approach. 2 guards at the main entrance, according to the blueprints Jimmy pulled. Probably more inside. Security cameras on the corners and over the doors. Diesel, you're the battering ram. Bones, you cover our 6. Anyone pulls a weapon, you drop them. Non-lethal, if possible, but we're not dying for these rent-a-cops. Everyone else straight to the 3rd floor room 304. We find Evangeline Whitmore, we extract her. We're gone before local law even knows we were here. Questions? There were none. These were men who understood violence as a language, who had operated in gray areas where official rules didn't apply. They moved through the darkness like ghosts leaving their bikes hidden in the tree line. The front gates were locked reinforced steel designed to stop vehicles. Diesel studied them for approximately 3 seconds before backing up, getting a running start and slamming his entire body weight into the pedestrian access gate. The metal shrieked in protest but held. He hit it again. The lock mechanism shattered. The sound echoed through the silent compound like a gunshot. Lights came on. Alarms began to wail. Two security guards rushed out of the main entrance flashlights, sweeping wildly, hands hovering over their holstered tasers. "Halt! This is private property. You're trespassing." Reaper walked straight toward them, his leather cut clearly visible in the compound security lights. The winged death's head, the bottom rocker that read Spokane. The guard's eyes went wide with recognition and fear. "We're here for visiting hours," Reaper said, his voice flat and emotionless. "It's 3 in the morning. You can't just—" Diesel grabbed the lead guard by his tactical vest and lifted him off his feet with one hand. The man's flashlight clattered to the frozen ground. "What room is Evangeline Whitmore in?" The guard's face had gone pale. He looked at the assembly of massive bikers behind Diesel, calculating his odds of survival if he refused. The math wasn't good. "I can't. Patient confidentiality. I could lose my job." Diesel shook him like a rag doll. "You can lose your job or you can lose your teeth. Choose fast." "Third floor, room 304, secure ward." "Please, man, I got kids." Diesel set him down almost gently. "Then go home to them. Tell your partner to do the same. Forget you saw us. Understand?" Both guards nodded frantically and sprinted toward the parking lot without looking back. The Angels moved like a military unit through the facility's main entrance. The night nurse at the reception desk took one look at them and wisely decided that her minimum wage wasn't worth dying for. She pointed toward the elevator with a shaking hand before ducking under her desk. They bypassed the elevator, taking the stairs 3 at a time. On the 3rd floor, they found the secure ward locked behind a heavy steel door with a numeric keypad. Bones pulled a small device from his jacket, something he had acquired during his time in military intelligence, and attached it to the lock. It cycled through combinations in seconds. The door clicked open. Room 304 was at the end of a long, sterile hallway that smelled of disinfectant and despair. The door was unlocked. Inside, sitting on a narrow hospital bed and staring blankly at the wall, was a woman who might have been beautiful once. Evangeline Whitmore looked older than the photograph in the locket. Her face was gaunt, hollowed out by malnutrition and chemical sedation. Her auburn hair hung limp and unwashed around her shoulders. She wore a standard-issue hospital gown and that 1,000-yard stare that Reaper recognized from combat veterans who had seen too much. But her eyes were the same striking green as the woman in the photograph, the same as her daughter's. She turned her head slowly as the bikers entered, moving with the sluggish uncertainty of someone heavily medicated. She looked at these massive, terrifying men covered in leather and patches and showed no reaction. No fear, no hope, just a flat, dead-eyed acceptance that this was simply the next terrible thing happening to her. "Evangeline," Reaper asked, his rough voice dropping to something surprisingly gentle. The woman blinked slowly. "Are you Victor's men? Are you here to finish it? Because I don't care anymore. Do whatever you want. I'm already dead inside." Reaper pulled off his leather gloves and knelt down beside the bed, making himself less threatening. "No, ma'am, we're not with Ashford. We're with your daughter, and she wants her mother back." At the word daughter, something flickered behind the chemical haze in Evangeline's eyes. A spark, faint but there. "Cora." The name came out as barely a whisper, broken and desperate. "But Victor said she drowned. He told me she fell in the lake while I was having one of my episodes. He said it was my fault. He said—" Her voice cracked, and she began to sob, deep, racking sounds that shook her entire frame. Reaper put a hand on her shoulder, solid and real. "He lied. Cora's alive. She's safe. And we're taking you to her right now." The transformation was immediate. The fog lifted from Evangeline's eyes like someone had thrown a switch. She grabbed Reaper's arm with both hands, her grip surprisingly strong. She's alive. My baby's alive. Yes, ma'am, but we need to move. Can you walk? Evangeline swung her legs off the bed and stood. She swayed unsteady from months of forced medication and limited movement, but determination kept her upright. Diesel moved to her side, offering his massive arm for support. She took it without hesitation. Let's go home, Reaper said. They moved back through the hallway, Evangeline supported between Diesel and Bones, the rest of the team covering their flanks. Behind them, they could hear the facility coming alive, staff shouting, more guards mobilizing. But the Angels had what they came for. As they burst through the main entrance into the frozen morning air, Evangeline looked up at the sky, breathed free air for the first time in 2 years, and began to laugh through her tears. It was the sound of a woman who had been buried alive and had just clawed her way back to the surface. They mounted up Evangeline, riding behind Diesel, holding on tight. The Harleys roared to life and tore down the mountain road, leaving Riverside Psychiatric Institute and its chemical prisons behind. Back at Rusty's Auto Salvage, dawn was breaking over Spokane in shades of gold and pale blue. The storm had passed, leaving the city covered in pristine white that would soon be turned to gray slush by traffic. Inside the heated garage, Cora had fallen back into a restless sleep, occasionally whimpering in her dreams. Doc Thorne sat nearby, monitoring her vitals, occasionally adjusting her IV. Stone had been keeping watch for hours, his Colt within easy reach, his eyes on every shadow, every sound. He was a man who had learned that the most dangerous time was always right before dawn, when guards got tired and attackers got bold. When the sound of approaching motorcycles echoed through the salvage yard, Stone was at the garage door before they had even killed their engines. Reaper climbed off his bike and gave a single nod. We got her. Diesel helped Evangeline dismount. She stood on shaky legs, looking at the grimy garage, the assembled bikers trying to process where she was and what had happened. Then her eyes found Stone, and beyond him through the open office door, the small form sleeping on the cot. Is that? Her voice failed her. That's Cora, Stone said. She's pretty banged up, but Doc says she'll heal. Evangeline's hand came up to cover her eyes. She took a step forward, then another, moving like a woman in a dream. Stone stepped aside, letting her pass. She walked to the office doorway and stopped, frozen, staring at her daughter. Cora must have sensed the presence. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused, at first still clouded by sleep and medication. Then they locked onto the woman in the doorway. For a moment, neither moved. Mother and daughter separated by 2 years of hell, looking at each other across a distance of 10 feet that might as well have been the Grand Canyon. Mommy, Cora's voice was small, uncertain, like she was afraid this was another dream that would dissolve into nightmare. Evangeline's knees buckled. She dropped to the concrete floor, arms outstretched, and Cora scrambled off the cot despite her injuries and threw herself into her mother's embrace. They collided in the middle of the garage floor, holding each other with desperate intensity, both of them sobbing. Evangeline kissed her daughter's bruised face over and over, her hands running through Cora's hair, touching her arms, her shoulders, reassuring herself that this was real, that her child was alive, that they were together. I thought you were dead, Evangeline wept. He told me you drowned. He said it was my fault. I wanted to die. I tried to die. He lied, Mommy. He lies about everything, but I knew you weren't crazy. I knew you'd come back. Around them, the toughest, most dangerous men in Washington state stood in absolute silence. Some looked away. Others wiped at their eyes with calloused hands, pretending it was dust from the garage. Stone watched the reunion with an expression of such profound pain and longing that Ace had to look away, because Stone was seeing what he would never have. His Lily would never run into his arms again. His daughter was gone forever. But he had given this mother her daughter back, and that would have to be enough. Eventually, Evangeline looked up from where she knelt on the floor, her daughter still clutched against her chest. She found Stone in the assembled crowd and held his gaze. You're the one who saved her. It wasn't a question. Stone nodded. Thank you. I don't have words for what you've done. I don't know how to. You don't need words, Stone said quietly. Just keep her safe. That's enough. Doc Thorne stepped forward, his medical instincts overriding the emotional moment. Ms. Whitmore, I need to examine you. Check your blood. Make sure they haven't done permanent damage. Over the next few hours, Doc Thorne drew blood samples from Evangeline and ran them through tests. The results made his expression darken considerably. He pulled Stone and Ace aside, showed them the readouts. Lithium carbonate, olanzapine, lorazepam, haloperidol. Doc's finger traced the numbers. They had her on doses that would sedate an elephant. These levels maintained over 2 years. They weren't treating mental illness. They were creating it, manufacturing symptoms, making her dependent, breaking her mind systematically. Can she recover? Stone asked. With time, yes. The brain is remarkably resilient, but she'll need proper medical supervision, gradual tapering, counseling. In Stone, we can't take her to a regular hospital. The moment she shows up in the system, Ashford gets notified. He still has legal custody of both of them. Stone's phone buzzed. A text from Tank Eyes on target. G-Wagon confirmed. Found evidence. Need you to see this. Stone stepped outside and called. Tank answered immediately. I'm still on Ashford's estate. The G-Wagon is definitely our vehicle. Tires match perfectly. But Stone, I gotta look inside through the garage window. There's a child's pink sneaker on the passenger floor and a wool blanket in the back seat. It's got fresh blood stains. He didn't even try to clean it up. Stone's jaw clenched. He thinks he's untouchable. Gets better. His lawyer showed up about an hour ago, Arnold Finch, big-time defense attorney. They met in the study for 30 minutes. After Finch left, I followed him. He went straight to Judge Morrison's private residence. Judge Morrison, the name Reaper had mentioned, the judge who had declared Evangeline mentally incompetent. They're coordinating, Stone said, getting their story straight for when Evangeline turns up missing from Riverside. What do you want me to do? Stay on Ashford. I want to know every move he makes. Stone went back inside. Evangeline was sitting with Cora now, the little girl curled up in her mother's lap, both of them just existing in the miracle of being together. Ace was in the corner with Reaper going through the financial documents they'd pulled on Ashford's business dealings. Stone pulled Ace aside. We have a problem. Tank says Ashford's lawyer just met with Judge Morrison. They're building a defense, and we still don't have anything that will hold up in court. Everything we have is tainted. Illegal search, illegal extraction. No warrant, no probable cause. So we get probable cause. How we break into his place again, anything we find gets thrown out. Same with the blood work from Evangeline. We extracted her illegally from Riverside. Ace was quiet for a moment thinking. Then he pulled out his phone. I'm calling in a favor, someone who might be able to help us do this the right way. Who, FBI? Stone's eyebrows shot up. You have a contact at the FBI. Special Agent Sarah Morrison, no relation to the judge. She's public corruption unit out of Seattle. Clean as they come. Hates dirty cops and bought judges more than we do. I helped her with something a few years back. She owes me. And you think she'll help us? If we give her Victor Ashford on a silver platter? Yeah, I think she'll help. Ace made the call. It took 3 rings before a professional female voice answered. Morrison. Sarah, it's Ace. I need a favor. There was a pause. Ace, it's 6 in the morning on Christmas Day. This better be good. It's better than good. How would you like to take down a billionaire CEO for attempted murder of a child fraud and false imprisonment? Another pause. Longer this time. I'm listening. Victor Ashford, CEO of Ashford Logistics. We have evidence he's been running a scheme to steal a $200 million trust fund, locked the rightful owner in a psychiatric facility, and drugged her into incompetence, then tried to murder her 6-year-old daughter to complete the inheritance. That's a hell of a claim. What kind of evidence are we talking about? Physical evidence from the crime scene. Medical records showing systematic poisoning. The victim and the child both alive and willing to testify. Financial records showing bribes to judges and doctors. And possibly a confession if we can get him talking. Possibly. We need your help to do it legally. Everything we have right now is fruit of the poisonous tree. But if we can set up a controlled operation, get him to confess on record, that's different. Morrison was quiet for several seconds. Stone could hear the sound of pages turning like she was reviewing something. Okay, I'll bite. Where are you? Spokane, Rusty's Auto Salvage. I know the place. I'll be there in 90 minutes. Don't do anything stupid before I arrive. She hung up. Ace looked at Stone. We're going to do this the right way. By the book. We get the evidence legally, we hand Ashford to the feds, and we make sure he never sees daylight again. And if the book doesn't work, then we go back to our book. But we try this first. True to her word, FBI Special Agent Sarah Morrison arrived exactly 90 minutes later in an unmarked sedan. She was in her early 40s, dressed in a sharp business suit, despite the holiday, with short, dark hair and eyes that missed nothing. She walked into the garage like she owned it, flashed her badge at the assembled bikers, and went straight to Ace. You've got 60 seconds to convince me this isn't a waste of my time. Ace gestured to Evangeline and Cora sitting together in the corner. Evangeline Whitmore, heiress to a $200 million trust fund, locked in Riverside Psychiatric Institute for 2 years by her husband Victor Ashford after he had a judge declare her mentally incompetent. That's her daughter Cora. Stone found her last night beaten and left to freeze to death on Highway 10. Morrison's eyes flicked to the little girl, to the visible bruises on her face, and something in her professional demeanor shifted. Jesus. Doc Thorne can show you Evangeline's blood work. Lithium levels off the charts. They were chemically restraining her, not treating her. Manufacturing mental illness to justify the commitment. Morrison walked over to where Doc had his medical records spread out. She studied them for several minutes, her expression getting darker. Then she turned to Evangeline. Ms. Whitmore, I'm FBI Special Agent Morrison. I need to ask you some questions. Are you comfortable talking to me? Evangeline nodded. Cora held her mother's hand tightly. For the next hour, Morrison interviewed Evangeline, taking detailed notes. The story that emerged was chilling in its calculated cruelty. Victor had spent a year after their marriage systematically isolating Evangeline from friends and family. He'd convinced her to trust him with all financial decisions. He'd started slipping lithium into her vitamins, gradually increasing the dose until she exhibited symptoms of mental illness. When she finally had a public breakdown at a charity gala, he'd used it as proof she was dangerous. He told me I tried to hurt Cora, Evangeline said, her voice shaking. He said I'd attacked her during one of my episodes. But I never did. I would never hurt my baby. But the doctors at Riverside, they kept telling me I didn't remember because of my condition. They kept increasing my medication until I couldn't think straight anymore. Until I started to believe maybe he was right. Maybe I was crazy. Morrison's jaw was tight, and Judge Morrison signed the competency order. Yes, Victor said they were friends, golfing buddies. I'll bet they are. Morrison closed her notebook. Okay, here's the situation. Everything you've told me is compelling, but it's testimonial. Ashford's lawyers will claim you're mentally unstable, that your memories are unreliable due to medication. We need hard evidence, documentation of the bribes, proof of premeditation, something that ties Ashford directly to the attempted murder of your daughter. We have financial records, Reaper said. Bank transfers from Ashford to Judge Morrison's offshore accounts. Payments to Dr. Brennan at Riverside, all on a flash drive. How did you obtain those records? The garage went quiet. Morrison smiled grimly. That's what I thought. Illegally obtained. Won't hold up in court. Ashford's lawyers will have it suppressed before lunch. So what do we do? Stone asked. Morrison looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. Saw the leather cut, the tattoos, the hard face of a man who had lived a hard life. But she also saw something else in his eyes. Determination. Purpose. We set a trap. We get Ashford to confess on the record, knowing he's being recorded. That's admissible, but it's dangerous. He's already demonstrated he's willing to kill, and if he suspects you're wired, I'll do it, Stone said immediately. Stone Ace started. No, this is on me. I found Cora. I brought her here. I'm going to finish it. Morrison studied him for a long moment. Okay, but we do this my way. Full FBI support, tactical team on standby, and you follow my instructions to the letter. Understood. Understood. Good. Let's get you wired up. They spent the next 2 hours preparing. Morrison fitted Stone with a recording device so sophisticated it was virtually undetectable. They rehearsed the approach, the questions designed to get Ashford talking the safety signals if things went wrong. Your job is simple, Morrison explained. Get him comfortable. Let him think he's won. Men like Ashford, they can't resist gloating. They need to prove they're the smartest person in the room. Give him that opportunity and he'll tell you everything. As they were finishing the prep, Cora approached Stone. She was walking better now, the color back in her face, but she still looked small and fragile in the oversized t-shirt. Are you going to get the warden now? She asked. Stone knelt down to her level. Yeah, little bird, I am. Will you come back? The question hit him harder than he expected. He looked at this child who had survived the unsurvivable, who trusted him despite every reason not to trust any adult ever again. I'll come back, I promise. Cora threw her arms around his neck, hugging him with surprising strength. Be careful. The warden is very mean when he's angry. I'll be careful. Stone stood, checked his phone for the address Tank had sent, and looked at Ace. If this goes wrong, it won't. But if it does, you make sure Cora and Evangeline get somewhere safe. Somewhere Ashford can never find them. You have my word. Stone walked out into the cold December morning. Morrison's tactical team was already in position, unmarked vehicles staging 3 blocks from Ashford's estate. Stone would go in alone on foot and knock on the front door. Just a man coming to have a conversation. The walk to Victor Ashford's mansion took 15 minutes through the pristine, snow-covered streets of South Hill. Stone had time to think about Lily, about the choices that had led him to this moment, about the fact that he was about to walk into a viper's nest, wearing a wire, and hoping a billionaire sociopath would confess to murder. The gate to Ashford's estate stood open. Stone walked through his boots, crunching on the plowed driveway, and approached the massive front door. He could see lights burning inside. Through the windows, he caught a glimpse of Victor Ashford in his study drink in hand. Stone rang the doorbell. Footsteps approached. The door opened. Victor Ashford stood there in an expensive silk robe, holding a crystal tumbler of scotch, looking surprised and then amused to see the biker on his doorstep. Mr. Stone, what an unexpected pleasure. Come to Grovels to beg me not to press charges for kidnapping my daughter. I came to talk. Talk, Victor laughed. About what exactly? About what happens next. You want Ashford. You know it, and I know it. I just want to understand the play. Victor's eyes gleamed with interest. He stepped aside, gesturing for Stone to enter. Come in, let's discuss reality like civilized men. Stone walked into the mansion, the door closing behind him with an ominous finality. In the surveillance van 3 blocks away, Morrison and her team listened through the wire as Stone walked deeper into the lion's den. Victor led Stone to his study, the same room where they'd fought days ago. The blood had been cleaned from the carpet. The books had been reshelved. It was like nothing had happened. Drink, Victor asked, pouring himself another scotch. No thanks. Suit yourself. Victor settled into his leather chair, completely at ease. So you came to talk. Talk. Cora, Stone said. What happens to her? She comes home naturally, where she belongs. I'm her legal guardian, after all. The courts will see this whole situation as exactly what it was, a mentally unstable woman in a biker gang conspiring to kidnap a child. And Evangeline. Back to Riverside, the doctors will be very concerned about her escape. They'll likely recommend increased security, increased medication, for her own protection, of course. Victor swirled his drink. In a few years, she'll likely have an unfortunate accident. These things happen in psychiatric facilities. Patients become unpredictable. Stone's fists clenched, but he kept his voice level. And you get the money. $200 million. dollars. Yes, I've earned it, frankly. Do you know how exhausting it is to pretend to care about someone for 5 years? To play the devoted husband while married to a vapid heiress? I deserve that money for my performance alone. What about Cora's real father, Daniel Henderson? Victor's smile widened. Ah, poor Daniel. Tragic accident. Brake failure on a mountain road. He went right over a cliff. Convenient timing, right after you married Evangeline. Wasn't it, though? Victor leaned forward, his eyes bright with malice and alcohol. You want to know something funny? Stone Daniel saw right through me from the start. He tried to warn Evangeline, told her I was a fraud, said I only wanted her money. So I made sure he couldn't say anything else. You killed him. I had it done. There's a difference. I paid a mechanic named Terry Jenkins $50,000 to cut Daniel's brake lines. Made it look like mechanical failure. The police never even questioned it. Victor was warming to his subject now, unable to resist the urge to prove how clever he'd been. And then I spent the next year convincing Evangeline she was losing her mind, slipping lithium into her vitamins, gaslighting her, making her doubt her own memories. It was almost too easy. The wire was capturing every word. In the van, Morrison was recording building an airtight case. And when that wasn't enough, Stone prompted you had her committed. Judge Morrison was very helpful. A few $100,000 and some creative medical testimony from Dr. Brennan, and suddenly Evangeline was a danger to herself and others. Perfect. But as long as Cora was alive, you couldn't fully access the trust. Exactly. The trust has very specific provisions. If Evangeline dies while Cora is still a minor, the money goes into a locked trust for the child. I can't touch it. But if Cora were to die first, Victor smiled, then Evangeline inherits as the surviving parent. And since I have power of attorney over Evangeline, I control everything. So you tried to kill a 6-year-old girl. I removed an obstacle. Victor stood up, pacing now energized by his own brilliance. I drove her out to Highway 10 during the blizzard, told her to get out of the car. When she refused, I encouraged her. She was crying, begging. It was pathetic. I left her there and drove away. I assumed the cold would do the rest, but you had to interfere. Stone stood slowly, rage building in his chest like a wildfire. You're confessing to murder, to attempted murder of a child. You understand that, right? Victor laughed. Who are you going to tell the police? I own the judges on my payroll. You're a convicted felon, Stone. Your testimony is worthless. And even if you were recording this conversation, he paused, his eyes narrowing. You are, aren't you? You're wearing a wire. Stone said nothing. Victor's smile didn't falter. It doesn't matter. You obtained this recording through deception and trespass. My lawyers will have it suppressed. You've accomplished nothing. Actually, a voice said from the doorway, he accomplished exactly what we needed. FBI Special Agent Sarah Morrison walked into the study, her badge displayed flanked by 4 federal agents in tactical gear. Victor's face went pale. Victor Ashford, you're under arrest for the murder of Daniel Henderson, the attempted murder of a minor child, conspiracy to commit fraud, and violating the civil rights of Evangeline Whitmore through false imprisonment. Morrison pulled out handcuffs. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. This is entrapment, Victor shouted, backing away. He broke into my home. I was under duress. Actually, Mr. Stone knocked on your door, and you invited him inside. Security footage from your own cameras confirms that. The conversation that followed was entirely voluntary. You weren't threatened. You chose to confess. Morrison gestured to her team. And regarding Terry Jenkins, we have him in protective custody. He's very eager to testify about cutting Daniel Henderson's brake lines in exchange for immunity. Victor's face went from pale to crimson. I want my lawyer. You can call him from federal detention. You're being charged with federal crimes, Mr. Ashford. No bail, no friendly local judges. You're in our system now. As the agents moved forward to handcuff him, Victor looked at Stone with pure, undiluted hatred. You think this is over? I have resources you can't imagine. I'll fight this for years. I'll tie it up in appeals. You'll shut up, Morrison said calmly, because every word you say right now is being recorded and will be used to demonstrate consciousness of guilt. They led Victor Ashford out of his mansion in handcuffs past his expensive art and imported furniture, past all the trappings of wealth that couldn't save him now. Stone followed them out into the cold morning air, watching as they loaded the billionaire into an FBI van. Morrison turned to Stone. That was good work. Dangerous, but good. What happens now? Now we build the case. We have his confession on tape. We have Terry Jenkins's testimony. We have Dr. Brennan at Riverside under investigation and likely to flip to save his medical license. We have Judge Morrison under federal scrutiny for accepting bribes. She handed Stone a card. We also have enough evidence to immediately terminate Ashford's custody claim and his power of attorney over Evangeline Whitmore. She's free, her daughter is safe, and you're not being charged with anything. I'm not. Your previous arrest for assault security footage shows Ashford attacked you first. Self-defense. The breaking and entering charge won't stick when the owner invited you inside for today's conversation. Morrison almost smiled. Sometimes the system works, Mr. Stone, not often, but sometimes. The FBI van pulled away, taking Victor Ashford to federal detention where he would await trial. Stone stood in the driveway of the massive estate watching it go, feeling something he hadn't felt in 10 years. Peace, his phone buzzed. A text from Ace, it's done. Come home. Stone walked back through the snow-covered streets of South Hill, past the mansions and the wealth and the illusion of safety that money provided. He walked back to Rusty's Auto Salvage, to the grimy garage, where real protection lived, where outlaws had become guardian angels. When he walked through the door, Cora ran to him and threw her arms around his legs. You came back. You came back. Stone knelt down, pulling the little girl into a hug. I told you I would, and I keep my promises. Evangeline stood nearby, looking at Stone with an expression he couldn't quite read. Gratitude, yes, but something more, something that looked like family. Thank you, she said simply, for everything. Over the next 48 hours, the world shifted on its axis. Victor Ashford was formally charged with first-degree murder, attempted murder fraud, and a dozen other federal crimes. Judge Morrison, facing his own federal investigation, resigned and fled to the Cayman Islands, where he was arrested 3 days later. Dr. Brennan at Riverside lost his license and faced criminal charges for his role in Evangeline's false imprisonment. The media had a field day. Billionaire CEO arrested for murder. The society pages filled with shocked reactions from people who had thought they knew Victor Ashford, who had attended his charity galas and praised his philanthropy. Evangeline and Cora were placed in temporary FBI protective custody while preparations were made for the trial. On December 28th, they came to say goodbye before being moved to a secure location. Cora stood in the garage wearing new clothes that Ace's wife had bought for her, looking healthier than she had when Stone found her in the snow. But her eyes were sad. Do you have to go away? She asked Stone. You're the one going away, little bird, to somewhere safe, somewhere the bad people can never find you. Will I see you again? Stone looked at Evangeline, who nodded. When the trial's over. When this is really finished. We'll come back. Cora reached up and unclasped the gold locket from around her neck. The one with her mother's picture. The one that had started everything. She held it out to Stone. My mommy gave this to me to keep me safe. But now I want you to have it. To keep you safe. Because angels need protection too. Stone's throat closed. He took the locket, its weight almost nothing in his palm, but meaning everything. Cora, I can't. Please. She looked up at him with those green eyes so much like Lily's. My first daddy is gone. My second daddy was mean. But you're like a real daddy, the kind who saves people. So I want you to have it, to remember me. Stone knelt down and pulled the little girl into a hug. She was so small, so fragile, but she impossibly strong. I could never forget you, little bird, he whispered. Never. Evangeline put a hand on his shoulder. When this is over, when we're free and safe, and the trial is done, I'd like you to be part of our lives, if you want. Cora needs good men in her life, men who protect instead of hurt. Would you consider that? Stone looked up at her. I'd be honored. They left in an unmarked FBI vehicle, Cora waving from the back window until the garage was out of sight. Stone stood in the doorway long after they were gone, holding the locket, feeling its weight like a promise. 6 months passed. Spring came to Spokane, melting the snow, washing away the last physical traces of that Christmas Eve. But the memory remained branded into Stone's soul like a tattoo. The trial of Victor Ashford became a media sensation. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence, the recorded confession, Terry Jenkins's testimony about cutting Daniel Henderson's brake lines, the medical records showing Evangeline's systematic poisoning, the financial trail of bribes and corruption. Victor's lawyers fought for months, filed every motion imaginable, but the evidence was insurmountable. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. On a warm June morning, Stone stood in the gallery of a federal courthouse in Seattle, watching as the jury foreman stood to read the verdict. In the case of United States versus Victor Ashford on the charge of first-degree murder in the death of Daniel Henderson, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of attempted murder of a minor child, we find the defendant guilty. On all charges of fraud, conspiracy, and violating civil rights, we find the defendant guilty. Victor Ashford showed no emotion as the judge sentenced him to life without possibility of parole in a federal supermax prison. His empire was forfeit, his reputation destroyed. Everything he had built, everything he had stolen, taken away. Justice for once had been served. Stone slipped out of the courtroom before the media could start asking questions. He walked to where his Harley was parked, ready to ride back to Spokane and back to his life. But a voice stopped him. Stone, wait. He turned. Evangeline stood at the courthouse steps, looking radiant in a simple dress, her hair catching the sunlight. Beside her, holding her hand, was Cora. The bruises were long healed. She'd grown in 6 months, filled out, looked like a normal, healthy child. I looked for you inside, Evangeline said. I wanted to thank you. None of this would have happened without you. You don't owe me thanks. You're the one who survived him. We survived him. Together. She walked closer. The FBI says we can come out of protection now. The trust fund is back under my control. Cora and I are going to start over. New house, new life, fresh start. That's good. That's real good. We were hoping you'd be part of that fresh start. Stone looked at Cora, who was smiling up at him with complete trust and affection. I don't know how to be what you need, Stone said quietly. I'm a biker, an outlaw. My world is violent and your world saved us when no one else would, Evangeline interrupted. When the police failed us, when the courts failed us, when society failed us, you didn't. You risked everything. She took his hand. I'm not asking you to change who you are. I'm asking you to let us love you for exactly who you are. Cora tugged on his hand. Are you going to be my daddy now? My real one. Stone looked down at this little girl who had been thrown away like trash and had somehow found her way to him on the worst night of his life. Who had given him a reason to fight when he'd forgotten how? He thought about Lily, about the promise he'd made to her grave to be better, to do better. And he realized that redemption didn't look like he'd expected. It looked like this little girl's hand in his, this woman's faith in him. Yeah, Stone said, his voice rough with emotion. Yeah, I'd like that. Cora threw her arms around him, and Evangeline joined the embrace. And for the first time in 10 years, Stone felt whole. Later that evening, after promising to visit Evangeline and Cora the next day, Stone rode out to Highway 10, to mile marker 42, to the exact spot where he'd found Cora in the snow 6 months ago. He placed a small memorial there, a simple wooden cross with plastic flowers. It was still standing, weathered but intact. Stone parked his bike and stood in the exact spot where his life had changed, where he'd been given a second chance he didn't deserve. He pulled the gold locket from inside his jacket and opened it. The photograph of Evangeline and baby Cora stared back at him. He carefully added a second photo he'd been carrying Lily, his daughter, taken a week before she died. Two little girls, both 6 years old, both blonde, both with green eyes. One he'd lost, one he'd saved. Together they made him whole. He knelt in the dirt by the memorial and whispered to the daughter he'd buried 10 years ago, "I did it, baby girl. I finally did something right. I saved her. I saved them both. And I think maybe that's what you'd want me to do. Keep going, keep fighting, keep protecting people who can't protect themselves." The wind whispered through the pines, carrying away his words. Stone touched the locket to his lips, then fastened it around his neck, tucking it beneath his shirt where it rested against his heart. Two guardian angels, one in heaven, one still here. He stood, climbed back on his Harley, and rode toward Spokane as the sun set behind him. Toward Evangeline and Cora, toward Ace and the brothers, toward a life that had seemed impossible 6 months ago. Society saw the leather, the tattoos, the Hells Angels patch, and thought they knew who the dangerous men were. But sometimes the most dangerous thing a man could be was a protector, a father, an angel in the snow. Stone smiled genuinely for the first time in a decade. The road stretched out before him, full of promise and possibility. And for once, the future didn't look like an ending. It looked like a beginning.